Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Public Works and Finance Committee of the Moscow City Council. It is Monday, February 24th, 2020. To my left is Sandra Kelly. To my far left is Gary Riedner representing staff, and to my right is Brandy Sullivan. I'm Gina Terusio. First item on our agenda today is the approval of the February 10th Public Works and Finance Committee meeting minutes.
I move that we approve those minutes.
They look good to me, too.
Awesome, same here. Okay, our first item is electronic signature policy. Mia Bautista and Gary Riedner.
Thank you. What you have in front of you is a policy that has been promulgated through the city attorney's office. We have worked through with our risk management group committee, as well as our auditors. There's been some concerns that as more of the modern media, meaning fax is on the outs now, and now it's emailed documents and things like that. So having the authority to sign a document that has legal significance is been allowed by the state. We just need to have appropriate controls on that.
Okay.
So Mia looked it over, developed this policy, which has been reviewed again by our risk management group. It appears that it has sufficient controls on the utilization of an electronic signature that we'd like to turn it into policy, and then any electronic signature that is used will be used through this policy.
Do you have any questions about it?
And so it covers that electronic signature can be used for all City of Moscow representatives? Is that correct?
Where it's appropriate.
Yeah.
But again, it'd be something like if my signature was going to go on a document, then it would have to go, if Lori said had access to that signature, there'd be a process by which I would authorize it remotely somehow, and then she'd be authorized to go ahead and use it, but somebody just couldn't go in and pull it and put it on any document.
And the signature itself would be secured in a safe location, and the clerk would have, and we'd have some method in place where the clerk would know of the people who are authorized to use an electronic signature.
Seems it would help with efficiency in those
Yes.
sometimes where.
Exactly.
Yeah. So-
And we utilize it now for things like letters and things like that.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to have it so we could actually execute legal documents as well.
Was there anything that made you nervous about going through this?
No. And we already do it through the court system where everything is e-filed, so we already use electronic signatures in our office, in the legal department office, for our discovery and any court filings.
Yeah.
I was surprised that you weren't doing it already, so.
Yeah, really. Okay, so I think we're all in agreement that we could recommend approval of this. Now, do you want that to go, it can go on consent?
Yeah, it's an internal process.
Perfect. Okay. Mia, thank you very
Yeah, I'm
much.
glad I could help.
Our next item is Phase 5 of the Runway Realignment Project and Terminal Design Grant Application Approval. Mr. Riedner, and I see Tony Bean jumping out of his chair in the
Please come
audience.
forward, Mr. Bean.
Come on up, Mr. Bean. Are you excited about this one or what?
I'm excited about all of them.
Ah, okay.
We're making progress. Progress is good.
Well, I'll turn my presentation over to Tony since it's a grant that he's in charge of, so
Okay.
take it away.
So the request is to pre-authorize, just as we've done with other grants, but this is the last one. We're done with runway grants. This money was supposed to be,
That's our resolution form.
okay, so the funds were supposed to be issued last year, and the FAA just simply didn't have the $6 million. So what they did was they carried forward into this year and allowed us to keep the $1 million that we have for entitlement was already programmed for terminal design. They allowed us to keep it. Typically, they take it, and it all goes to runway, and you get left out. But we're asking for a maximum of $8 million, which in case we have another airport that doesn't use their entitlement, which we've had in the past where we've got donations from other municipalities that allows that to move forward. And so the funds, the match for the funds, this was something that Gary and I both discussed, is we are still short the total, I believe it's
79,000.
479 $491,000, I believe. $491,000. And that money would be due in 2021. So we're covered budget-wise for all the work that we're going to do in 2020. And we are looking at other partners. We will come to the sponsors last for those funds. We'll go through the airport passenger facility charge and other partners first. That being said, the two cities are who signed the agreement. So ultimately, at the end of it, if we couldn't find any other means, that's what we would have to do, is to come back and ask for the two sponsors to split the $491,000.
In my discussions with Tony, typically it's not the best thing to go ahead and commit to something that you may have some liquidated liability for or unliquidated liability. However, there are opportunities, PFCs from the airport passenger facility charges can also be utilized for this. So there are some other funding alternatives that if we couldn't raise the funding any other way, that we'd be able to look at a funding package that would have hopefully not a very much impact on the two sponsors.
Because we loan from the city of Pullman and pay interest, and we could do that by paying back the PFC as it comes in. That is the other means to make up the difference.
That being said, that's not a preferred method because those PFCs can be utilized for other airport needs, especially with the terminal project coming up. So, and this is the way that we, when the funds were raised for the first project, essentially the runway realignment project, and over $11 million was raised. It was raised the same way. City of Moscow, City of Pullman put up $2.5 million apiece over a period of 5 years. University of Idaho, $500,000, so on and so forth. So that's how those funds were raised. So this would just follow that same model.
Did I hear something different come out of your mouth, though, about going to sponsors last or something?
Sponsors last. So the two cities would be the last ask. We're going to go through everybody else on the donor list and the airport. What's that?
Who is everybody else?
So you've got two state DOTs, so both state DOTs. You've got both universities, the two counties, the Port of Whitman, the airport itself, and SEL as a partner
Yeah.
as well.
And we've received, you've been notified of some funding already committed by Whitman County.
Yeah, Whitman County come up with this, we were $1 million short. They come up with $600,000 last year.
Wow.
And so we had $600,000. That covers us through the entire 2020.
And those are designated economic development monies, .09 monies, they call them in Washington.
So is the amount between that 491 and the 649 that's required for the match coming from,
So the 649 is a screw up. It's 707,009. I tried to send it because I caught the mistake. Yeah, the 707,009, that's the amount minus 80,000, because there's 40,000 for the terminal that's coming from the city of Moscow and 40,000 from the city of Pullman that takes care of the match for the million of terminal. And then if we get the second million, then we'll make that decision. That's probably coming out of the airport funds, would be the other $80,000.
Yeah, you'll recall in the FY 2020 budget workshop, the FAA had indicated that they would issue a grant for airport or terminal planning. And so contacted City of Pullman. City of Pullman indicated they would budget $40,000 as part of the match. And then the City of Moscow, as the other sponsor, would put up the other $40,000. That's already in our budget.
okay, so that was kind of another question I had with this. If you get the whole award and have the local match, only 40,000 is going to go towards the terminal design, or could that increase if we're awarded a larger additional granting for that? I mean, are
So-
we committing,
so if
how
we
much
get-
are we committing for the,
40,000,
okay,
because if we have an additional
Of
80.
this set of grants.
Right.
Yeah.
and the remainder would be for the runway
The remainder would be for the runway.
realignment?
Yep.
And then, can you talk a little bit about the turnaround time, as far as the reason that you want the pre-authorization? It mentions that,
The grant's already been issued.
okay,
Congress has already authorized the grant. This is the fastest. I've been doing this 14 years. I've never seen grants come out in February, ever, which is, for development, is extremely positive, especially if you're in the Northwest, the Northeast, anywhere there's weather. Our biggest complaint is we can't get money and have it ready to go when we're starting to do construction. And the fact that the FAA is issuing funds in February timeframe, so airports have the ability to move forward and get their things done and actually have money for contractors on time is amazing, because it's been something we've complained about for years. And it actually cost this program a year because of that. Because we couldn't get money in time to really get started. So we ended up sliding the whole program one full year, which cost us, extra money in that sense. But yeah, the 6 million's already been announced, which is a scramble, because now the FAA doesn't even have like application documents. We don't even have current application documents, so we're trying to get all the application documents together and get it turned in, because they're ready to issue funds. So it's a good problem to have.
I was just gonna say, as long as you can get the money.
Yeah. Do you have any questions
No.
about this? Okay, so I think
I think we should go regular.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I would really recommend some sort of, for no other reason than just clarity, maybe some sort of breakdown of where everything's coming from in the 80,000 and the 707 and that. It's a little bit confusing for me. And I'll just speak for me. It's hard to
Yeah,
understand
we could do that.
We'll also be having an airport finance committee meeting this Wednesday, so we can get some clarification on some of that stuff. And Tony can present as well what his plan is to get the additional match
Yeah.
on Monday.
That'd be cool. Very good, positive motion, but we need to just, a little more clarity, Tony. That'd be great.
Yeah, you can do that.
All right, cool. And we'll recommend adoption of this resolution, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Do you want to drop that document off at Lori?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Our next item is the lot line adjustment for 1122 South Mountain View Road, Heron's Hideout Park. Amy Henrich, where are you, young lady? Putting on a presentation.
All right, so let's see, there we go. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So today, we have a lot line adjustment for 1122 South Mountain View Road. At the December 16th, 2019 City Council meeting, the council voted to approve the purchase of a 1.22 acre parcel of the 1.87 acre parcel shown here. The proposed lot line will increase the size of Heron's Hideout by 1.22 acres, and the result will be a remnant parcel of .64, which currently contains a single family right here. This shows the survey that was conducted, showing the new lot line along this area here. The 1.225 acre parcel will be acquired by the city, leaving the remnant of 6.43 or 28,000 square feet. Current zoning, this shows the new lot lines. Current zoning is R1 or low-density residential. In R1 zones, the minimum lot square footage is 9,600 square feet with a lot front minimum of 80 feet. The existing home would meet all the required setbacks. So for that reason, for those reasons, staff would recommend lot line approval with no conditions.
Amy, how big is the remaining lot of the house?
This one here?
.643.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or 28,000 square feet.
Appreciate it.
Do you have any questions?
I didn't. Did you have any questions?
Is that, so I assume the lot line is consistent with the part ownership?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, this was, when Bill presented it to city council, this was the proposal at that time, that this is likely what would happen.
Well,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Approve?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. We like to move that ahead, Gary, and I think probably, can we do consent?
Yeah, it's pretty
Okay,
basic.
Awesome. We'll go to
Thanks,
consent.
Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Our next item is the downtown parking study request for proposals. Mr. Belknap.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
fall here.
No takers.
All right. So provide a little bit of background. As the council is aware, during the preparation of the current fiscal year budget, the FY 2020 budget, the city council included $45,000 in the budget to hire a consulting firm to complete a downtown parking study and to provide the city with recommendations regarding the management of that system. A proposed study would inventory available parking spaces, evaluate current demand and utilization, assess potential future redevelopment or new development projects in the area, and ultimately provide recommendations for the city's consideration. It's anticipated this study would include participation of a broad array of stakeholders, largely involving city staff members, city commissions that may be related to this project, downtown business owners, Chamber of Commerce, University of Idaho. We'll work on a broad group of stakeholders who would help guide this study and this effort. And to support then the study, we have drafted a request for qualifications. I apologize for the typo in the heading. Because this is professional services, we'll do this based on a qualification-based selection process. So what we have drafted for your consideration is a request for qualifications. It advertises the project and the services the city is seeking. From that, we would review responses that we receive and statements of qualifications we receive from consultants, and then make that selection and move forward into a contract. The study area has been kind of roughly delineated by this area shown in red. So this, apologies. This is Jackson Street here on the west side, Washington here on the east, and Main Street down the middle. There's a fair amount of kind of spillover parking that happens on that east side of downtown because of the topography. So we've taken that boundary all the way up to Jefferson Street. It extends really just south of Lewis Street here at the south end, and really kind of all the way up to C Street. Even though kind of the core of downtown ends here at A Street, there is some on-street public parking in this area. And we wanted to make sure that we did include those kind of fringe areas, because any changes of management programs in the core is likely to result in some redistribution of parking utilization around the edge. So we want to make sure that we captured kind of the area where we'd see that likely impacts occur. This will be what we include in the SOQ as we get into the study. Certainly that boundary can be refined based on individual needs or assessments or conversations with the consultant, but this is kind of to give the consultants that may be reviewing this project the sense of the scope of the project. This is the area that we have defined as that starting point. The study approach, as outlined in the RFQ, includes both starting off with an understanding of those existing conditions, reviewing past studies, reports, historical documents, inventorying the existing parking facilities, analyzing the capacity, availability, and patterns of use of existing parking facilities, identifying any major demand generators we may see, so we can kind of understand how that demand materializes, what point of day do we see that, interview city staff, other key stakeholders in the process. And then for us, because our community is somewhat unique, we have nearly a 25% mode shift to bicycle and walking and transit use. To assess those existing facilities, to kind of understand how they impact demand on parking, and as we get into transportation demand management strategies, what we can do to try to help promote those forms of transportation to help reduce demand for parking facilities. We'll look at also ADA parking distribution and relative compliance of those parking spaces within the downtown area. That is something we hear fairly often, is just the question about, do we have enough ADA compliant parking that's well distributed around the downtown area? And also to assess, we have a number of large community events that happen downtown. Many times those displace available parking on Main Street, and kind of understand those impacts and demand on the public parking system, and ultimately then to prepare a map of the existing system and detail our current conditions. We would also ask the consultants to try to take a look after they assess current demand to try to predict potential future demand and changes in demand we may see moving forward. Again, trying to quantify that impact and estimate what that means for parking and demand of parking in the downtown area. And then we like to shift into identifying those best practices for parking solutions, really looking at the establishment of a community-specific goals and objectives of the parking system. What do we want the parking system to provide us? How do we want to utilize that asset and support the growth of downtown? And then to lay that against best practices for parking management strategies designed to achieve those outcomes. And then helping us with that process, we'd like to have them develop a criteria and evaluation matrix that stakeholder group can utilize in identifying strategies that would be appropriate for Moscow to consider and making those recommendations to the city council. So ultimately, out of this, we expect to receive recommendations regarding parking management strategies to achieve those performance objectives, to also maybe look at options of transportation demand management and strategies we may employ to help reduce parking demand and enhance user convenience. We hope to have an assessment of the availability of ADA parking spaces and recommendations for new supply or locations or design to improve that user access and convenience. Many of those are not, their historical sites have been signed and designated, but they may not be fully compliant with current ADA standards, so we'll evaluate that as well. And ultimately to have recommendations regarding what we anticipate for future demand, maybe over the next 15-year horizon, and any potential need for additional public parking supply development that may result. And then, of course, anything else that comes up during the course of study that's relevant. For the consultant, we are articulating we want them to have that initial kickoff meeting with that working group, meet with city staff and the working group as necessary through the course of the study. We'd like to have them come to present that first draft of their study to the working group, and then be also here for 2 public meetings at the appropriate times and points in that development process. Those will be likely open house format, either here at the council or down at maybe the Chamber of Commerce office, and then the final presentation of the recommendations to the city council. So estimated project schedule is, we're kind of hoping to take this to the council for review and approval of that RFQ at the next meeting on Monday on the 2nd. After that, we would advertise the RFQ. We'd run it for about 30 days. We would have interviews then about mid-April, select consultant, and have contract come to the council in early May. We try to use that June and July timeframe for that historical document review and system mapping, and then wait till August, September for that parking system assessment. We want to make sure that U of I students are back and in session, so we see that full peak demand. Then hopefully recommendations coming in October and wrapping up the project in November of this year is kind of the overall timeframe. As this was a council initiative, we have taken the liberty of drafting this, but we want to make sure that the project scope and the study as it is outlined meets the council's objectives, and we are seeking any additional direction that the council may have before moving forward and publishing the RFQ. And with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Will you go back a couple slides? You talked about community-specific something, and I didn't quite understand.
So community-specific performance objectives. So what do we want to have for an occupancy rate for parking downtown? You know,
Okay.
what do we want to see where do we want to see parking available? What percentage do we want to have available? Different management strategies will result in different outcomes and utilization of the parking system. Whether that's a duration management, whether that's a pay-to-park management system, you can price your parking, or you can manage your duration of enforcement in order to have a certain amount of outcome, a certain amount of turnover of the spaces that results in a certain amount of available parking spaces in different locations. So there are national standards that they would use, but we really want this parking system to provide what the community would like to see. So we need to understand what that is and kind of develop those benchmarks for ourselves.
Okay. I think I just tripped on the wording of community-specific. I mean, I didn't quite understand why we had to say that, because we know we're developing it for Moscow.
Precisely. But
Correct. But this is what's articulated in
To the group.
going out to the consultant, saying we
Perfect.
want them to assist us in developing a community-specific performance objectives for our parking system.
rather than just throw national standards at it.
Right, okay, awesome. Do you guys have
That
questions?
was the
Yeah,
intent.
so then just to add on, so we're seeking their assistance in identifying what is our goal, what is the community's goal for?
Correct, yeah.
Say
Share-
occupancy.
You know, they can share information about what other communities traditionally pursue, what are generally viewed as being desirable turnover and availability of parking. It may be that our community wants to see something slightly different, so that's what the stakeholder group would help share. And then essentially, we need to have that benchmark against which to evaluate different management strategies. And so we want to make sure we get that clearly identified, that the working group identifies that objective.
Yeah.
And then we can use that as our benchmark as we move through the study and recommendations.
I have a couple questions. One, when I looked at the red lines, which they make sense, will the survey also include situations where possibly parking will be maybe away from downtown and it might be a busing people in, like parking at a city, especially with farmer's market and having
park and
scheduled
ride?
bus service, a park and ride? Does that include that at all, or
So
is that a
that's-
whole different?
Certainly could be a strategy. It's going to be maybe beyond the scope of this project to identify where that would be. But if offsite parking in order to facilitate some community goals and objectives for downtown is viewed as being one of the strategies as desirable, then certainly that could be among the menu of options that would be evaluated.
And the other thing that popped into my head, this might sound really silly, but does this also include bicycle parking?
So we hadn't really fully scoped that, and much of that we've already inventoried on our own, and is fairly straightforward for us to identify where we think we have additional bike parking need in order to make sure it's well distributed among downtown. So we didn't feel that we needed to necessarily engage the consultant on that aspect of the study.
I do have a couple more questions, but I just wanted to first say too that, I mean, I'm enthusiastic about seeing the breadth of the information that we're going to get, which is something we've never, ever had before. So I'm looking forward to this. Who would the working group consist of?
So we haven't fully fleshed that out
Okay,
yet.
that's fine.
Certainly, we're looking at representatives from the Planning and Zoning Commission, Transportation Commission, and relevant city staff members. Chamber of Commerce, we'd probably look for 2 or 3 downtown business representatives, and then anybody else we may think beyond that point. We don't want it to be too large a group, so it's unwieldy, but it needs to have a heavy representation both of downtown business owners, Chamber of Commerce, commissions that are relative, probably community at large, and then staff that would be there to support it. Probably we would like to have a council member serve as representative as well.
Can I also add on, I think it's really important too to look at some of our seniors, because I know that parking issues are different, and I would hate for them to get left out with that whole
Good
breadth.
point.
Yeah, I was going to suggest even some representative from, that will be utilizing the ADA and what they're.
And we could reach out to the Disability Action Center and to have a representative that may serve on that group as well.
And then with the public sessions, where does that fit into the timeline schedule?
So
do you think?
I'm sorry, I kind of blew up my presentation by hitting the wrong button here. So we haven't fully fleshed that out yet, but the public sessions would likely be coming in that September to November time period. So it's going to be, we'll have to have the base, the background information. Usually we have one to introduce the project, and then one to present the preliminary findings and take input upon that. And then we'll refine the program, and that's what will come to the city council during that final presentation. So it's likely we would see one right kind of towards the end of summer, probably maybe in that either late August or early September time period. And then the next would be in October when we have the preliminary recommendations, and we take any input received in that process, refine the recommendations for the presentation to the council in November.
Okay. And then in the RFQ, I know that it isn't specifically included, and maybe that's not necessary, but looking at the green parking permit things, is that just going to be, I know that
Sort
is
of
something
permit
that they would
fees?
look at, but yes.
Oh, yeah, that's
And
part of the
all-
whole
and those
process.
lots, okay.
Correct, yeah.
And the
They'll do
one-
an inventory of all parking supply on-street parking
Okay.
lots, how they're currently managed, and assess the utilization of all of those resources and make recommendations.
The lot that's right out here, I think, is outside of that boundary, is it? It
No,
looked like-
we go all the way
okay.
to Jefferson. Oh, so
Okay.
you mean like the one right across on that? Yeah, we'll include that because it's part of the
Okay.
public parking system.
Okay. And then, I think at one point, we were hopeful that maybe there could be some spring counts too, but it looks like that's just not gonna,
Given where
work
we
with this
are at
schedule.
this point in
Okay.
time, in the advertisement selection contracts, I don't think it's going to
Okay.
be likely that we'll have spring counts. It'll probably be likely fall. We do have prior counts that we collected via drone photography, and so we have some historical. We flew at least 5 flights, so we have that historical data. We have other historical counts we've taken in response to certain land use actions, and then we'll probably be doing largely fall counts and kind of comparing how that compares to historical data to get a good overall picture of how the system is utilized.
then my last question, with the, within that whole area, I think it will be really useful, and hopefully they will, separate out sections, rather than just one big number of, say, the
yeah.
occupancy, but,
Yeah.
stretches of it.
Historically, we
okay.
will inventory every block face
Okay.
and map it on every count for every block face, so we know where that parking is available, rather than just as an aggregate.
Great.
Like, sort of to go with that, do we know yet when we're looking at the current MZ, where they have they also bought the parking lot, will they still control that? Will that be available? Do you know if they're planning to sell that section, or are they going to keep that section and also have their new building? Do you know at all?
Which parking are you referring
The
to?
old Daily News parking lot.
So they don't own that. They're just releasing that building.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's another owner, another individual that owns the building and owns that property.
Okay.
So they will no longer have use of that, it would be my belief.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I don't know that it would ever shift to public use anyway, would it?
Not unless the
I
city
just wasn't
acquired
sure where
it
that
for some
stood.
reason or entered in some
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
agreement.
A long time ago about acquiring it, but council didn't want to proceed with it at that time. I don't even know if it'd be available at this point.
I know there is a tenant going into part of the building.
I would presume the owner would want to reserve that for their tenant for
I agree
the
with
future
that.
use. I mean, it's a 20,000 square foot building, that's a significant asset downtown to have off-street parking to serve your building. So I would suspect they would retain it.
Yeah, I like also how you're going to have them look at what if some of the current small lots were to transition to, in the future, to not be parking lots anymore. Is that correct?
It is looking at some sites that may be underutilized properties, not necessarily publicly owned, but, typically parking lots in an urban area like a downtown area are prime development sites. So
Yeah.
we do want to kind of contemplate and anticipate potential future demand. We also make reference to a potential parking in lieu of fee. It's been, it's been recommended in the comp plan in the past. We've had such little development in the downtown area that would actually end up generating enough income to do anything with, but we do want to take a look at that. One of the ways of mitigating parking impact is to potentially require new uses or change of use to provide parking, which is very difficult. Most properties in the downtown core are fully developed with building footprints. But in those situations, you can have a fee in lieu that they pay that helps mitigate their impact, and those funds can go towards the development of additional parking supply. The challenge with that is you have to have enough development to collect monies to actually do something within a reasonable time period, generally within 10 years. And if you're unable to do so, you have to return those funds. So that's something we'll have them just take a look at, because we should be looking at the overall impact of new development and its demands upon the parking system downtown, and evaluate all potential mitigation measures that we have. And that includes transportation demand management, different management strategies, potential additional supply creation if there are opportunities, and just assess the whole suite of options that might be available for the city to consider.
I promise this isn't a loaded question, but we're going to be able to do all of this for $45,000.
We will see. We will see.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of the range that we were
Yeah.
kind of shared with on similar scale studies. It may be as we get through contract negotiations. I mean, this is what we'd love to see, based on what we're describing in this scope. Once we go through that process and select a consultant, we'll then get into contract negotiations, where we'll sit down and go over what is it going to take to get this work completed. Most of the analysis, recommendations or best practices are pretty readily available. It's that data collection that's going to be the big issue. And so we'll have to kind of talk through how can we do that. We were kind of hoping to supplement that with some of the drone photography. The limitation we ran up against is we could not fly over moving vehicles. That is a FAA prohibition. And so that kind of caused some complications, because then you'd have to launch on each block, so you did not cross a street. We'll work that. These consultants do these studies all the time. I'm sure we'll kind of talk through the process, whether they bring in, short-term temp labor over a course of a week to do a bunch of accounts, or whether we might be able to secure student labor to do some of that work. We'll kind of talk through that process, and we'll talk through the budget, and ultimately we'll come back to the council with that contract and scope of work that we were able to negotiate, and see what we can achieve for that funding level.
Okay. Cool. Regular agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, for sure. Awesome. Bill, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We don't have any reports that I can see on my agenda, so somebody want to make a motion for an adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. We are adjourned.